Of Squadcast from the USA.
Hi, everybody. Wow, what a stage. I have never been on a stage like this before, so this is going to be a learning experience for everybody because I will also be exploring the microphone, exploring my stage presence, so please do, give me some smiles, indicate that this is going to be, it's going to be a great experience for everybody. I just flew in this morning from New York, so please excuse if I literally fall asleep on stage. Sweet. Okay. I would love to know, by a raise of hands, who here works in radio? Wow. Okay. And who here works in podcasting? Okay. And who here who works in radio is interested in podcasting? Okay, that's good. That's a very good sign for me as somebody who's going to be teaching you about podcasting. So let's get into it. We're going to be talking about social media for podcasts and radio. And I added the "and" radio because this is Radiodays Asia. But if I'm being honest, I don't know that much about radio. What I know about radio is that I have a favorite radio station. It's called 107.1 The Peak, WXPK in Briarcliff Manor in White Plains, New York. It's great, but I don't know much beyond that. So here I am. These are my credentials. I know a lot about podcasting. Okay, here's who I am. That's a picture of me. I hope I still look like that. This is just from 2 years ago. As I was introduced, I am the community manager at Squadcast, which is a remote recording platform that I'll tell you more about in a second. I'm also the founder of Earbuds Podcast Collective, which is a weekly podcast recommendation newsletter, which you can get at earbuds.audio, and I am in partnership with James Cridland at Pod News. And I am also the podcast co-host at Sounds Profitable, which is a weekly podcast and newsletter about the business of podcasting. And then I'm also one of the co-founders of Podcast Taxonomy, which is an international multidisciplinary effort to standardize roles and credits in the podcast space. So those are some of the things that bring me here today, and those are some of the ways that you can get in contact with me. And I would love if you do get in contact with me. I love hearing from people. Questions, comments, anything. All right, so Squadcast, just to tell you a bit about why I'm here, what brings me to Kuala Lumpur and to Radiodays is that I am the community manager at Squadcast, which is a remote recording platform that helps podcasters and anybody record in studio quality, video and audio, recorded locally on both sides. And me, as the community manager, my job is to bring people together who use Squadcast or who might want to use Squadcast to, figure out how they want to be involved with Squadcast beyond just the remote recording process. So do they want to learn about podcasting? We have a Slack channel for that. Do they want to learn more about podcasting? We do weekly and monthly events for that. And we have opportunities for them to promote themselves and to just learn about the podcast space, because ultimately we know that people stick around in podcasting if they are doing a good job and getting numbers and getting downloads. So my job is to help people grow those numbers, grow those downloads so that they want to keep using Squadcast. Okay, but we are really here to talk about social media. Raise your hand if you are a regular user of social media. Okay, and just shout out for me some of the social platforms that you use. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. Okay, very cool. Same. I'm on the internet constantly. I am tired because my eyes hurt from just constantly being on the internet. But I love it. And I think social media is great and it's important, but it is not everything. This is the thesis statement. Say it back to me. Social media is important, but it's not everything. Thank you. That was really great. Really good energy in here. Let's try it again. All right, yes, social media is important, but it is not everything. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that you need to be on social if you have a podcast. And I'm going to try to relate this to radio, but like I said, radio is not my forte per se. But what is my forte is building a brand for yourself. So if you are a host of a radio show and you want to be building a brand for yourself, you need to be on social, but then you need to kind of just take it back a step and say, it's important, but it's not everything. So let's get into what that means. So here's what I'm going to be talking about in the next 20 minutes. We've got why social media, why not social media do's, social media don'ts, and then I've got a surprise at the end, so stick around. This is me enticing you to stay in your seat. All right, so why social media? And thank the designer at Squadcast for these fun graphics. So social media is important because you want to remind your listeners that you exist. So they log on to Twitter and they see that you've posted, and that's a little bit of a mental reminder for them to check out your most recent episode of your podcast. Lovely. It also reminds them if you're on TikTok, even if you're not posting about something that is specifically about your podcast, it reminds them that you are alive and that you are still putting out podcast content. And that's important because there are so many podcasts out there. There are so many radio shows out there. There are so many other places where people could be spending time on the internet. So you need to remind them that you exist. It also helps you connect with your listeners. You can ask questions. You can put out polls on social media. You can do a whole slew of things that let you have access to your listeners. You can say that you have a newsletter coming out and that they can subscribe to that newsletter. There are just tons of reasons to be on social. If you want to buy ads, you can potentially buy ads. I am not a huge fan of driving traffic straight to podcast listeners, or I'm not a huge fan of having people click on a visual ad to have them listen to a podcast. It's hard. The conversion is really, really tough. What you might want to consider for buying ads is if you want to send people to a course that you're selling or to some other added bonus that your podcast is building content around, but it's not necessarily, oh, go listen to this podcast right now, because that's going to be a really tough sell, and I'll get into that in a second. This is another really big reason to be on social, is that you can source ideas. You can let your listeners feel like they are a part of your show by asking what the next episode should be about. Maybe you don't want to give them that much creative freedom, but you can say, what should the next series be about? I would love to hear your input. I really, really value I really, really value what my listeners say, so I would really love to know from you, my listeners, what should the next series be about? What should the next season be about? Who should I be interviewing? Who do you want to hear from? So you can do that all on social media. These are the reasons that you should be on social media. And then, of course, there's social proof. So this is super important. The reason that you want to have a consistent the reason that you want to be consistent on social media is so that people see that you are alive on social media, so that when they go to your Twitter, they don't see that your last post was in 2020, because maybe your podcast is still alive and well. Maybe your radio show is still alive and well, but you have not posted on social in a long time. That means that the people who are just discovering you for the first time from social are going to think that your show doesn't exist. Even if it does, even if they were to click the link in the bio, they would see that your podcast is live and that you had an episode come out yesterday. It doesn't matter, because some people are not going to go beyond the fact that the date marker says 2020. So you need to be active. It also means that if a lot of people are commenting on your posts, and a lot of people are liking your posts and sharing your posts and quote tweeting and posting them on Instagram or duetting you on TikTok, it means that people see your content as valuable. So you want to put things out there that people want to share, that people want to be associated with. Well, let's talk about why not social media. So first of all, there are so many places to be on social media, and I have a slide, and we'll talk about some of those in a minute. There's so many social media platforms where you could possibly be spending your time. It doesn't convert. I mentioned this before, but when you are scrolling on social media, I'll use myself as an example. When I'm scrolling social media at the end of a long day, I'm plopped on the couch and my phone is up this close to my face, and I just want to be scrolling on social media. That's my mentality right then and there. I don't want to be distracted from that. I want to catch up on social. I want to catch up on the latest tweets, the latest Instagram posts, my friends, my family. I don't want to be taken off of social to then go listen to a podcast. As much as I love podcasts, I didn't mention this, I listen to 40 hours of podcasts every week. I love audio, and I love to go for walks when I'm listening to audio. I love to wash the dishes, clean my house, whatever it is. I look for excuses to listen to podcasts, but what I don't do is get up from my couch while I'm scrolling, while I'm plopped on the couch, and then go for a walk, because I'm in the mindset of going for of being plopped on the couch. So it does not convert. It is very hard to convert. And another reason not to be on social media is that people can be rude, so it can be really draining. Cheesy but true, You'll find that a few points in my presentation are cheesy but true. I feel like that's my brand. All right, so how should you actually use social media? I like to be, I like to make sure that I give you some real takeaways here. So first, you got to be discerning. There are so many places to be on the internet, and these are just some of them. You know, I don't even know how you choose. All of these could work for certain types of shows, so you need to be discerning. And we can get into how to be discerning, and if I don't get into that now, because there's a lot for me to get into, and in my head I did think I had an hour and 45 minutes to talk, and I only have 30, which is good. It's a good thing you don't want me to go on for that long. But we can talk afterwards. I'd be happy to talk about how you choose. You want to be concise and consistent with your social media. So, for example, you want to choose a color palette, you want to choose a font palette, and you want to make sure that everything looks good together. So let me just go over some of the images that you see here. Top left, that is the Instagram feed for Squadcast, the remote recording platform that I'm the community manager for. Spoiler alert, I also do social because startups are tough. So you can see that the colors are consistent. You can see that the fonts are consistent. You can see that there's a general happy vibe to it. You can see the same sort of characters occurring throughout. So that is something that I'm very conscious of. I don't just post willy-nilly on social media. I make sure that when I'm posting, the colors match the scheme. I make sure that the fonts match. And this can get really tough when somebody says, hey, would you post this on your social feed? And I'll say, I can post that on my Instagram story, but I cannot post it on the grid. It's important for the grid to look consistently good. Bottom left is just a color palette, so that comes from coolors.co, coolors.co. This is a color palette generator. So if you are new, if you're creating a brand from scratch and you're looking for colors, this is a really, really great tool to use. And bottom right is just how to choose which fonts to use, because often what you'll see on Instagram or on Twitter or anywhere where people choose to make images, what they'll do is they'll have their main font, and then they'll have a secondary font. And those fonts need to work well together. Generally speaking, it should be a serif and a sans serif font. And a lot of people make the mistake of not really running it by somebody if their social strategy looks good, because it is so important to look good. Again, I think a lot of people were swayed by the idea that we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but we really do judge social media by its cover. We judge podcasts by their cover art. We judge by internet presence, and your internet presence needs to look good, and it needs to convey what you are trying to convey in your podcast. You want people to see your images, see your social, and say, wow, I really like what they're trying to say in that. I'm going to go listen to it because I really like the color, I really like the vibe, and it looks smart, and it looks clean, and it looks concise. You should use threads. So this is just an example specifically for Twitter, but this is big because Twitter can be a huge opportunity for podcasters and for radio folks and really for anybody who is trying to grow your brand. So this is an example of a thread that I have done. Here's another, and here's another, and I'll just quickly go over them. So let's look at the top right. So last week at Squadcast, we introduced this new series called Feature of the Week, where each week we're showing off something different that you can do within the app. So this is just the anchor tweet. So in that, I say, here's what we're going to do in this thread, and then in the next 4 tweets, I gave a few more images of what that feature of the week is all about. So that means that somebody gets a little hint of what's going on at the top, and then they can get more information as they go down. And the idea behind that is let's hook them with something enticing at the top, introducing feature of the week. Each week we're going to do this, here's the value, and then each subsequent tweet will continue giving value. And then if you want, at the end, you can include a link to get more information. I recommend something in between. So sometimes, yes, including a link, sometimes not including a link. The idea there is you want to provide value for the people who are scrolling on social, but you don't always want to be making a sale. People can tell if you are always making a sale or always trying to get people to do the next thing. Sometimes you want to be giving value just for value's sake. Top left is just a fun one that I do on my personal Twitter, which is I learn a lot from audio. So every time I have a fun fact that I'm like, holy crap, I didn't know that before. I would not have known that without audio. I like to share those fun facts. So for example, the Washington, D.C. license plate has on it, no taxation without representation, and the person who came up with that got to have their license plate say, my idea. And I really like that, and I learned that from a podcast, so I shared that in that thread. Bottom left is, this is actually probably very useful for folks here who are interested in learning more about podcasts. If you want to learn more about plugging into the podcast space, I did a whole thread on that. So that's a really great example of if you have something to teach, use threads to teach it, and then, you know what? You can repurpose all that, make it into a blog post, make it into a LinkedIn post. You're going to have to change it up a little bit. Each social platform recommends that you create content natively for that app. So yes, you can take the gist of what you're saying in your thread and write it into a blog post, write it into a LinkedIn post, make it into some sort of TikTok content, but you are going to want to make sure that you are rewriting it to a certain extent. Different language is necessary for all these different types of platforms. And then in the center, this one is going on right now. I'm doing a campaign for the month of September called For the Love of Podcasts, where each day I'm highlighting a different podcast listener and talking a little bit about when they started listening to podcasts, how many hours of podcasts they listen to per day. So I'm making these cute little images for each person, and I'm sharing them in that thread, and then I am, you guessed it, repurposing that thread for a blog post so that it can live on forever. You should also follow accounts in your niche. Why do I have a picture of sauerkraut? Does anybody have a guess? We don't have time for any guesses. Sauerkraut. What does sauerkraut have to do with this? So basically, the example that I used to give when I give this spiel is beluga whales. So say you are a marine biologist, you're going to want to follow other marine biologists. You're going to want to follow other beluga whale accounts, but today I'm switching it up. We're talking about fermentation. So say you are a fermentation expert. You love sauerkraut. Everybody follows you because you give great content about fermentation, about the science behind it, about education, about gut health, and all that. You want to be following other accounts in your niche. So you're going to want to be following the Ferment Association. They have 11.7 thousand followers. That's a lot. You're also going to want to be following this person, Amanda. She's really good at fermentation. And you're going to want to be following her because not only is it great to see what she's posting, but it also gives you an opportunity to show that you're plugged into this community. The mistake that a lot of podcasters make is they only follow other podcast accounts, and then it's this circle of liking and reposting other podcast content. That is helpful, and you should be doing that as well, but a big thing that you need to be doing if you have a podcast about sauerkraut is to be following other sauerkraut influencers, which is not a sentence that I thought I would ever say. So yeah, you're also going to want to follow this guy, Michael. And a big part of this is not just liking and commenting. It's also disagreeing with them. It's also agreeing with them. It's also quote tweeting and saying, yes, but, yes, and. And then just one more, great fermentations. Just in case anybody here, I really hope I hit the nail on the head and somebody here is really good at fermentation. All right, and then this is, again, cheesy but true, which is my mantra. You should give more than you expect to receive, and I think, just prove me if I'm wrong, I just turned 30. I feel like that's a good thing about life. You should give more than you expect to receive. What do I mean by that? Sometimes it's just nice to tweet kind words about other people that you find to be inspirational in your niche. So, for example, the podcast recommendation newsletter that I run called Earbuds, we have a Patreon, and I had 2 people recently sign up to become patrons, and I thanked them publicly. Bottom left, people were showing off that they're using Squadcast by taking a screenshot of their session, so I make sure to shout them out and to give them something to repost. Give them something to repost that looks good. That's a really big thing. And then on the bottom right, I went to my friend Becca's website, and she has a really cool audio form that has her name written, and I thought that was really awesome, so I didn't tell her about this. I just decided to show it off. And the reason I do this is not just because, I want to be nice. Of course, I want to be nice, and I want to send people to Becca. I want to send people to Dennis. I want to send people to my Patreon supporters, but also because if you don't have something else to post, you can post about somebody else. When in doubt, pump somebody else up. Cheesy but true. Okay, fun part, how not to use social media. Love this one. Spamming your link is really annoying. So if you go on social media, you may find that any hashtag with podcast recommendations, podcast recommendation, podcast suggestion, podcasts, whatever, any hashtag like that is going to be filled with people promoting themselves. I am not saying that you should not promote yourself. You should promote yourself. You need to. Nobody else is going to until you hit, a certain threshold of audience, you need to be promoting yourself, but spamming your link is not the way. The way is to create valuable content over time that people see as valuable so that they want to come to you for your response on something. And a really big part of that is making sure that you are, if you feel the need to put your link somewhere, to drop your link, making sure that you are providing a reason for why your link is being dropped right then and there. So not just, hello, new podcast episode out now, but hey, I noticed that you're interested in this. My most recent episode has an interview with this person, which really touches on this aspect of what you are interested in. Here's why you should check out this episode. It takes much longer, and that can be really frustrating. This is not a hack. None of social media is a hack. It really does take time to build up followers who care about you and want to see what you post about and want to retweet it and want to share it on Instagram. It takes time, but it's worth it. Another big thing not to do is only using the Apple Podcast link. And this is sort of a default. A lot of people use the Apple Podcast link because Apple Podcasts were first in a lot of places, or they still hold a really, really big they have a really big hold on the market, especially in the US, but I know elsewhere as well. And a lot of people will just Google the name of their podcast, find the Apple Podcast link, and that's great. And it should be used sometimes, but it should not be used only. I recommend a service like Podlink, pod.link, or Chartable, or your own website. And the reason for that is because not everyone is listening on Apple. I know that's especially true outside of the US. Not everyone is listening on Apple. Not everyone is listening on their phones. So if you send them to a service like Podlink, which if you go to pod.link, you can search for the name of your podcast, and you'll see a nice landing page, and you'll see the ability to click play right there, but there's also tons of other icons of where you can listen to your own podcast, and you can send that link to folks, and then they can choose where to listen to your podcast. So that gives them the choice. That means you're not going to lose people just because you're sending them to Apple and they're not listening on Apple. I mentioned this before. You want to make sure that you are not changing your font and colors post to post. You want to choose a font palette. You want to choose a color palette, and you want to stick to that, make it look good, decide and stick to it. Unless for some reason you have some sort of special occasion and you're changing it up, that's okay. Consistency, transparency, and seasonality are super important in podcasts as well. So being consistent with your fonts and your colors, except if you're being transparent about the reason that you're not being consistent. And then seasonality just gives you the opportunity to change things up if you break things up into seasons. So if you really hate your font that you've chosen for season 4, you can say, you know what, in season 5 we're changing things up. Why? Because you're being transparent. You do not need to be everywhere all the time. I know that's kind of a sigh of relief. If you have a podcast about cooking, fermentation, let's say, I would be on Instagram. I would be on Instagram because that is a medium that lends itself very well to visuals. You're going to want to be sharing the visuals of your ferments. My friend's brother is actually really good at fermentation, and he posts these really funny videos where he opens his ferments and they burp. And that's hilarious, and that does really well on TikTok and Instagram. Doesn't really do so well on Twitter. So he doesn't necessarily need to be on Twitter unless he was willing to really spend time to repurpose that content and put it on Twitter. Lots of places to be. You do not need to be everywhere. And irregularity, do not be irregular. That's just a good lesson in life. You want to make sure that you have a consistent schedule with yourself and that you're sticking to that schedule. And that can be tough because, like I said, being on social is a lot. It can be draining. People can be rude. So what you want to make sure to do is make sure that you have chosen these social platforms. You're sticking to those social platforms. You've built in breaks for yourself if you don't love to be on social all the time. These are things not to do on social media. We like the graphics, don't we? All right, so let's recap. Social media can be powerful. Let me retake that for radio. Social media can be powerful, but it is not everything, so don't drive yourself nuts if it's not converting. One thing that you can do is use a tracking link if you're posting on social so that you can check who is actually clicking on those posts. Something like Bitly will even do the trick. And then you can tell if posts that include images do better than posts that don't include images, or posts on TikTok do better than posts on Instagram. And therefore, after your 3-month experiment, maybe you're only going to be hanging out on TikTok because TikTok is just better for your ROI for the time that you're spending. When in doubt, pump somebody else up. This is just, honestly, if you are starved for what to post on social, pump somebody else up. And one way you can do that is literally by taking a picture of me right now and saying, Arielle did a really great job at Radiodays. All right, podcast accounts are important. You should be following people in the podcast space. You should be following Pod News. You should be following Earbuds. You should be following Radiodays. You should be following anybody who posts about podcasts if you are a podcaster or if you're building a brand in this space. But you should also post about sauerkraut. You should also be posting about fermentation, making sure that I'm glad you're laughing, making sure that you are following people in your niche. Be consistent and make good stuff. May I curse here? Shit. Thank you. And then because my lovely Squadcast job has sent me here, I would like to offer you 15% off if you want to try Squadcast. You can come talk to me about that. And I would love to take your questions. I think we have a few minutes for questions. Is that right?
Questions, anybody? Yes, gentleman in the black t-shirt.
Audiograms? I'll repeat the question. The question was, do audiograms work? Yeah? The answer is, it really depends. Audiograms, for those who don't know, are when you have a static image file, and then a waveform, and then maybe some transcription. The answer is that a few years ago, people thought that was going to be the thing to solve discoverability, and it did not. What it can do is, if they look really great, it can be a nice thing to send to your guest to say, hey, would you like to share this? Would you like to, this makes you look good. This shares a clip from the episode that you were on. You look really great. Maybe you want to share that. But I would not expect it to convert for you. I would post it. It keeps your social alive, but I wouldn't necessarily, think that it's going to make a huge difference.
Hi, thanks very much. How do you deal with trolls? You said, people are rude. If there's something that's a disagreement, how far do you go?
The question was, how do you deal with trolls? I love that question. I've lately been getting more and more trolls. I think a lot of the time, blocking is a possibility. And I used to not use the block button, but now I do, because sometimes people really are just trying to get your goat, and it's not worth it. I would disagree to a certain extent, though. I think sometimes if you are building up a following and people really like you and you, quote, tweet a troll and you say, here's why I disagree, that could be a great way to build up your brand. But, be careful with yourself. Any other questions? I'm an open book. We've got another question. Yay.
Hi. So video podcasts are now starting to become more prominent, right? Do you think that the same playbook that you just taught us today will apply, or there's going to be some tweaks that has to be done, especially in repurposing and in pumping other people up, and also the fundamentals of how to market and also do acquisition for podcast listenership or video podcast listenership, considering YouTube is also entering the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was about video podcasting. Is the playbook the same? So here are my thoughts on video podcasting. I was just at Podcast Movement, which took place in Dallas, Texas last month. And the vibe around video podcasting seemed to be, we're trying it, but we have not seen results yet. Or we're trying it because we were told to try it. We're trying it because this other brand is trying it. Not necessarily we're doing it because we know that results will come. So I think I would treat video in your podcast the same way that I would treat social media experimentation. If you have the time and the resources to make really high quality video content, either alongside your podcast or treating it in the same plane as your podcast, putting it up as a video podcast on YouTube, that's great. But if you're going to make content that's less than stellar, that's not top notch, it's not worth it, because people are not going to want to view you sitting with your friends or, making your podcast live like that. There's really got to be thought behind what goes into a video strategy. So when it comes to promoting that on social, I think same thing. You know, different platforms lend themselves to video more than others. So TikTok, of course, Instagram Reels. There's a few, YouTube, of course, YouTube Shorts, and short content is becoming more and more popular as well. But I think the bottom line here, as I'm closing up, is if you have the time to do it, do it. Experiment for 3 months, and then come back and see what worked and what didn't, and double down on what worked.
Thank you.
Buzzer. Thank you all.
All right. Thank you, Arielle. Thank you. I'm now inspired. I'm going to attempt to become